Yaskawa. You are watching the IEC 61131 Basics video tutorial series. This video shows how to work with user libraries. Hi, I'm Matt Pelletier, and probably the greatest advantage of the IEC 61131-3 specification is that it is designed with reusable code in mind. POUs and data types that have been designed in one project can easily be imported into another. These projects are referred to as user libraries, and in this video, we'll show how to both create and incorporate them. I'd like to begin with an overview of the process of inserting a library into your project. Basically, what it comes down to is you have your project with a libraries folder, and you right-click Insert User Library. This user library is nothing more than another project. After you insert that library, the data that you get from that project basically are all of the functions and function blocks and even program POUs from that project. You also get the data types. What you don't get is the global variables or any hardware-based variables. Then for organization, any imported library will appear in your edit wizard under a new group with the name of that library. And it's a good idea to keep version numbers in those libraries just for good housekeeping. So that was real quick. I'd like to now show this, and you could go through and follow along with me and do this as well. It's the best way to learn. And so let's say that we're done with this project, and we'll do a final make. We can then go into make a new project, and let's start with the PLC simulator template like we did before. And the basic concept here is that I could insert a user library, which my project was called PQS1. Now it will automatically look in the libraries folder. There is a default that can be changed, but I'll have to navigate to the location of my project if I want to use it as a library. And by default, that will be up one level in the projects folder. And I have created a subfolder for myself, and there it is, PQS1. I can include this. And now this new untitled project includes this library. And I can open up the POU from this new project. And here in the edit wizard, I'll have this area called PQS1. And there you can see I can pull in the same blinker, force and temperature. My functions and function blocks are all here, and they can be used again. And the good thing is too that they can't really be changed. I can double click to open them. I can see the code, but I wouldn't be able to change them because it's in a different project. It's in my other project. So you have some level there of safety against editing this project, this library project, when you didn't really intend to. Now this is also a good time to look at these tabs that are part of the project tree. And if you were to widen this, you'll see that one of these tabs is for libraries. You can see the detail of any of the libraries that you've entered. And here I can see that I have, as I said, the data types and logical POUs. So any of my data types from the other project are included here, and also any of the logical POUs. The POUs include more than just the functions and function block. They include all of the program POUs as well. And so here you can see why it's important in your project not to use common words because, for example, main here from the logical POU, I would not be able to reuse because I have a logical POU called main already in my main project. I could rename this one, but the names are important. And so that's why we've been pretty strict about prefixing everything with YTTS. So while this is the basic way of inserting and using a library, so this, what I just showed you, is the main idea of user libraries. It's inserting a project, and then in the libraries tab you see what you have. You can use the function blocks, and you can even insert instances, program instances from that library. We could reuse IPCSim and QPCSim like we had in our other project. And so the rest of this video is going to be about the best practice of how to do this in a controlled and logical way so that you don't just have a big jumble of projects being used by each other. We've found from experience that doing a few steps will really help clean it up and keep everything organized. And so to outline some of these practices, we do have in our quick reference guide, which is available at yaskawa.com, we have a few steps here on how to best create a library. And I'll outline those steps here. The first step would be to save it in the libraries folder and give it a library sounding type of name. The second step would be to clean up and remake the project with that new name. And then finally, save your project as a zip. It creates a ZWT file. And this is a single file portable project that can be easily stored on a network drive or shared with others. And then you have a reference place to go back in case you unintentionally make any changes to the unzipped version. So here's an outline of some of the things that you should do. Number one is call it something with the name library. We'd recommend. Yaskawa uses the term toolbox to market our libraries, and we'd recommend you put the version number somewhere in that name of that project. We recommend you prefix all the data types. We've been good about that. We also recommend you prefix all of the POUs that you plan to keep. And finally, we found that it's usually not the program POUs that are of interest to the library, but rather the functions and function blocks. So you'd like to have a minimum of POUs required in order for the project to compile, probably an init POU and some type of, we call it palette POU, where you can put each block in so that it compiles, and then have a very minimum number of tasks and instances within that task. So again, follow along with me as we attempt to build our first library project so that we can have access to these three function blocks that exist in our project. So first we'll go to File and go back here to our project. I'd called it PQS1. I'm not going to save the untitled project. I don't need that. That was just temporary. And step number one was to save under a new name in the libraries folder. So we will do Save Project As. And then we'll go up to the libraries folder. And I will call it IEC Basics Library _ V001. Version control, very important. And that new project name and the path of that project is also shown here in the project tree window. So now the idea is that I'm not thinking of this project as an application solution for a parking gate anymore. I'm thinking of it as a library of functions and function blocks that I can use for future applications, perhaps parking gates or perhaps other. And so I'll keep the blinker, I'll keep this force and temperature, but I don't really need to have timers. I can delete that one. I don't need this task here called lowest priority. I don't need init. I really don't need any of these here. I think I can select several of them, and I'll just delete them. However, now you can see that I have tasks in my list for which there are no logical POUs. So I'll need to start deleting some of these. Remember, be sure that resource is closed, not minimized, but closed. And I think I'll delete everything but fast. And all of the instances. And now if the code would compile like this, I could leave it. But it says I'm missing a program instance. So you do have to have one program POU. So I will insert one, call it YTTS palette as a ladder diagram. And then in this palette, we typically put in each of the function blocks just to be sure they compile. So blinker. Just put in some test variables. force. I think I'll leave E and E and O alone. We can accept these default names. And there's temperature. And none of the global variables will be used, so while we don't really care about these, there's not any reason to remove them. They will not be imported. And let's see if this is enough to make. Oh, we didn't do the instance yet. So the fast should insert a program instance of YTTS palette. And now we can make it. So I have an error. Let's go to see the error. It says invalid data type. Bool. Let's see. I guess this V004 turned out to be bool. We needed L real. Okay, missed that, I guess. So now I have 0 errors and 2 warnings. It is a good idea to get rid of any of the warnings because you'll see those warnings in any of the projects. So anything about instances never used, let's get rid of that. 0 errors, 0 warnings. You know, I even like to do a rebuild project that sometimes shakes out a few other errors and warnings that may have been accepted. All right, rebuild even gave me 0 errors, 0 warnings. So I believe that I've prepared this project now properly. I have only one program POU. I have my function and function blocks. Each of them are tested here in this palette. I have compiled. I have one task only, and I've gotten rid of everything else that is not part of what I'm expecting in this library. Now it's time to zip the libraries. I'll just have to do save as zip. My next step is to zip the library. And when I do that, there will be some options. And one of them is to zip user libraries. And another one is to zip front-end code. This is important so that you don't have to recompile the library. It takes the result of my last build there, that make, and includes that. And it's also a good idea to zip the firmware libraries and the user libraries, anything that you may have added to the project. And we'll see that in ours we don't have anything there. So that won't apply for our case. There's also an option called page layouts, but that is not used. So let's do a zip here. File, save project, zip project as. We're in our libraries folder. I will change it to zipped project file. And I don't have any user or firmware libraries, but if I did, it doesn't hurt to check these boxes anyway. So we'll zip it now, and we now have we're going to be officially making version 1. All right. Let me just show you where they put that in Windows Explorer. It's not a Windows library. It'll be under C. This is Windows 7 here. C, users, public documents. And you'll see a MotionWorks IEC 2 Pro libraries. So I have some other libraries that I've downloaded from Yaskawa are also in here. But here's ours, IEC Basics Library _ V001. And this is the MotionWorks IEC 2 project, the ZWT. You can see that icon, ZWT version, little compression icon there. This is the zipped, portable, all-in-one project. The unzipped version is also called IEC Basics Library, but that's just a 4K file, which has all of its data here within this folder and the many subfolders and pieces of information that are there. So this is the working project, and then the zip project, one level up, wraps that all into one. And by the way, you always want to use MotionWorks IEC to make zips and to unzip them. Never try to use WinZip or WinRAR. They will not reconstruct directory structure appropriately. So now this zip library can be ported over to another computer. Maybe it's a computer that does not have this IEC Basics library. And so to simulate that, I'll just delete this confidently. So now I no longer have this. Maybe I should not have done that with the project open, but I'll just do close this project. And let's check that again. So I don't have IEC Basics. There I do. I'll delete it again. And so now if this was a new computer, a different computer, you could send that zip file to somebody. They could put it into their libraries folder. And then you could go here to open Unzip Project. Get that library and unzip it. And it asks you, do you want to unzip the project to the folder containing the ZWT file? Well, in my case, that is the library's folder. So I would click yes. If you had the ZWT file on your desktop, I would answer no. In any case, you can always answer no and then find the folder that you want to unzip to, and that would be the library's folder. You save it, that unzips it, and now here I'm looking at the restored, unzipped IEC Basics Library version 001. Now, what I always tell people to do is when you look at this unzipped version, take a little note of what the data types are of this library, because that'll be important in the next step here. TTS, custom types, and PLC task info types. And so this is a library. You really don't need to change it or remake it. What we want to do is to use this library in another project. So let's make a new project again with a PLC simulator in this case. So now I have a new untitled project, and we'd like to start with those 3 function blocks. So we'll insert a user library. Now it looks right in the libraries folder, and I see it here, IEC Basics Library. Let's include it. And your first step might be to say, okay, I've got a new project here, I've got a library, let's be sure that I can make this. And it seems that almost instantly it says there are 10 errors and 0 warnings. This is a little gotcha here because there are these data types defined more than once. You see, what happens when you do File New Project and you choose one of the template gives you some default data types and some POUs and some hardware. It's usually to your advantage, but in the case of a library that already includes those data types, it's a double definition. And so you can look in the library and look at the data types that are in it. And if that data type worksheet already exists in the library, you don't need to have it again in your project. And so you can delete it. And this is all you need to do now in order to make successfully your project. And so my empty project now has compiled with the library in it. And finally, I'd like to demonstrate what happens when you use a library to make another library. So let's say that I'm using this project untitled, and I want to use it to create yet another library. First of all, I would ask you, why not instead include these new blocks in the IEC Basics library? If you can, that would be better, not to have so many levels, but perhaps you have a library that is based on the IEC Basics but goes beyond it. And just to show an example here, I'll create a function block, and this will be something very simple. YTTS custom block, and in the interest of time, this one will have a very easy function. It's just going to take an input, and I'm going to move it to a custom output. You can do this. This means move one into the other. I'll compile this sheet. I think I'll rename this to YTTS custom palette. And maybe I added other functions and function blocks. The concept that I'm demonstrating will be the same, so that I can insert a YTTS custom block into here, just to show that it works. Okay, so I have a library within a library. And to make it interesting, I could even put in another data type. And also being careful not to use the same name as the library data type name. And I'll even quickly make a simple array. Maybe I'll make an array of 9 L reals. And now let's save this project as a library project called IEC Basics, and I'll use this word custom again, IEC Custom Library version 001. Okay, it wants to save everything. It is important to make or build after you change a name, so I'll do rebuild project. Got an error. What's this? Oh, got a leftover. And so now I have one library project that uses another library. And I have data types in this custom library project. My next step then would be to create a zip. I'll go down here to zipped project. And here's where it makes sense to check the box for user libraries. It means I would like to include this library. So let's zip it. Now back to the libraries folder here in Windows. I've got IEC Basics unzipped, IEC Custom Library unzipped. I've got that zip here. So let's say that I want to close this project. I'll do it right this time. And I'm going to delete everything of my libraries. Let's see that we have sent only the IEC Custom Library from one computer to another. So the unzipped folder, the MWT project, and even that original IEC Basics Library, I can confidently delete. And all I have now is IEC Custom Library, and it has the first library in it. So let's see how this works here. We'll do a new project. So let's see how this works now. The first step would be to open that library project, assuming that somebody had sent this to me. IEC Custom Library, unzip it. This time I'll say yes, unzip to that library folder. Good idea to keep those ZWTs, also a copy of them in the library folder. And now here we have that custom library v001, and we see the dependent library. Very good. Let me show you also what happens here in Windows. Do you notice that it gave me back IEC Basics Library as well as IEC Custom Library? So those two that I deleted now reappeared when I unzipped the library that included that custom library. But now here's the catch. If we go to a new project, and I'll have to do two library inserts. The first one can be the one that I wanted, the custom library. That's the second one that I had created that includes IEC Basics Library. But notice it doesn't automatically pull in that other library. You might think that it's hidden in there somewhere, but it's not. So it's up to you to do a manual insert. You can right click on that library itself to include its user library called IEC Basic Library. And now we have IEC Basics and IEC Custom Library. Custom Library uses Basics Library. When you have one project that uses another project as a library, when you create a new project, you'll need to use all of the libraries and their dependent libraries. And that was my point of showing this, is there's two inserts required in order to make. Of course, if I make now, I'll have these same 10 errors from the data types of the template, which I can delete. Make now gives me 0 errors. And you'll see that in one of the POUs. The edit wizard now has a group for each of the libraries, the custom library and the basic library, and I can use these again as I would use any other function block. So I hope by seeing these little demonstrations here that you can be convinced of the power and the flexibility and the way that you could really start to create your own functions and function blocks for your type of application and then reuse them, and in this way have a very rapid deployment of any machines that you create in the special area that you're in. If you can use different libraries at different levels of application, even things like your help here will make their way through the libraries. And I think a good conclusion would be to show Yaskawa's libraries. These can be found by going to yaskawa.com/IEC-TB. Now, we use the term TB Toolbox is our marketing term for the user libraries that Yaskawa has created. And you can see we have a whole host of user libraries for both the Pro and the Express versions. For example, one of the most common ones might be a PLC Open. You can download them, and there's that ZWT file along with the version number. But we've even made it easier. We've wrapped a lot of these into an installer, and if you download and run this installer as you would any software installation, it will give you all of those libraries, like the ones that you see here, Cam Toolbox. All these that say Toolbox are from the Toolbox installer. And of course they have to do with motion, since Yaskawa products are motion controllers. But in any case, we have these libraries available for free to all who use MotionWorks IEC. They are also well documented with the Toolbox manual. And the installer here, which I showed the download page, that has the advantage of installing the help in such a way that we can right-click on it. I'll show this here as user library. And so here I did not show the steps in the interest of time, but I have now PLC Open Toolbox V203, and you can use any of these, blocks here, and right-click on them for help, and brings up a beautiful help that shows exactly how to use the inputs and outputs. So I leave you with this idea, and to let you know that there are also videos on PLC Open Toolbox and Cam Toolbox where we highlight some of the blocks and explain a few examples really quickly how to use them. And finally, where to go from here in your training, you might try Yaskawa Toolbox videos, and you'll see that we have quite a few webinars and videos on the PLC Open Toolbox, many videos on YouTube and on our website. So with this, we conclude user libraries. We hope that this has been useful to you and worth your time and effort. Thank you for your attention.